Good morning. Again, my name is John Kalin with Rarick Pacific, one of the RPCC members. I'm really glad you guys are all here. Obviously, you've taken the first and hopefully toughest step into trying to figure out how you use reusables in your system. How do we drive waste out of the waste stream? Essentially, there's two paradigms. Andy talked a little bit about what some of those things are and why, but you can either be a closed-loop user of something where you have complete control over it. It's probably the easiest example of seeing, wow, how can the bottom line benefits of reusables work? But there are also open loops or contained loops that companies like Andy's take care of that close it, so that even if you don't have complete control over the assets the entire time, someone else can help make it a viable system for you. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Now, reusables can be a little bit daunting when you think about them sometimes, except that you guys use reusables all the time, every day, whether you realize it or not. Whether you took a bike or a car to work, you use that same thing over and over and over again to transport yourself to your job or to school or whatever. You eat breakfast, you use a bowl and a spoon to get that cereal to yourself over and over and over again. So you're using reusables every day. How do we get that and translate it into using it for your business? A third-party logistics example, let's say you don't ride a bike, but you take BART. Again, now you don't own that asset, but someone else owns it, and on a per-use basis, you're using that and trying to, again, reduce the waste out of the stream. So that's what we're going to be looking at. Andy mentioned the unexpected benefits. As we look at some of these case studies, we'll point out some of the instances, what were the original drivers, and then some of the things that really had an effect on why the savings were so much more impactful than anybody would have expected when they first started looking at it. One of the things that we would encourage you to do, obviously this is a big group of people, but at any time as we're talking about any of this, please wave your hand, ask questions, get involved. Even at the end of this, through Stop Waste, be sure to fill out the referral forms. They will help you and escort you, and even as Maya said, her group can help you guys figure out how to make this make sense for your organizations. One of the questions when we were talking to the public agencies this morning came up, I think it's good to point out, is does it make more sense if you're on the vendor side or on the receiver side or maybe the processor side to drive these reusable programs? And I think as you'll see is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where in the supply chain you are. If you have an ownership or control over some of what's happening, you can drive quite a bit about what's going on. As we talk about one of the first case studies here, has to do with beverages, and I'll hold up an example of what I'm talking about. These are some crates that are used for shipping Coke or Pepsi products, that sort of thing, soda bottles. And when we originally, you think about what soda was like in the 80s, everything used to be shipped in a corrugated box. That was just how things were done. So let's take 2-liter bottles, which is the example that you see up here. Typically, you would have 8 2-liter bottles shipped in a cardboard box, and the carbonated soft drink vendor would ship them into a Safeway or wherever it would go. That box cost about 50 cents. Used one way, went to the store, and then it was baled and thrown away. When we first introduced this package, we were talking about a product that cost about 5 times what the corrugated box cost at that time. So you think, wow, that's an awful lot more money to spend. How do we justify it? Well, what happens is by eliminating that single trip use container and reusing the container over and over and over again, the savings actually start to multiply very, very quickly. And as we look at the analysis, you'll see break even on some of these things happened in much less than 2 years, often in less than a year, which included the entire system cost, not just the acquisition of the container, but all of the extra equipment, machinery, backhauling, wash costs, everything else that you had to consider when you were looking at these systems. When we did a quick analysis, a sample analysis of one of the bottlers that we were working with, we looked over a 5-year time frame. Their annual case volume for CSD that they were shipping, for the carbonated soft drink that they were shipping, was 2 million cases, so 2 million boxes of 8 2-liter bottles. The float size that they needed, in other words, the number of containers they needed to accommodate that volume annually was 192,000. We call these castle crates because of these little turrets on it. They needed 192,000 castle crates in order to ship that 2 million case unit over the year, which was based on the fact that they got these containers through the system in about 5 weeks between filling it, putting it in an inventory, having it get shipped into the store, having the store use it, put on display, and then having it get returned back into the system, which also accounted for, obviously, when you think about soft drinks, there's seasonality. A lot more might be shipped right before Super Bowl Sunday, or right before 4th of July, that sort of thing, and it would account for those spikes. When we looked at the analysis, we also considered the fact that there would be some loss. We threw in a factor of 5% loss rate. In most of the instances, we saw that the loss rate was much, much less than that, usually less than 1%. And loss was in consideration of everything. It had to do with breakage, but also sometimes the containers just walked away and they couldn't find them again. They weren't recovered somewhere in the backhaul. And then also in this analysis, we considered the fact that they had to spend an extra $365,000 in equipment and machinery. You're talking about new palletizers, a new case packer to accommodate the plastic shipping container, that sort of thing. When you looked at the results, and we actually have an analysis that we can share with you if anybody's interested in the actual more of the nuts and bolts, but the 30,000-foot view, we had an NPV of $836,000. The return on investment was almost 300%. Internal rate of return of 51%, and again, the payback here was something like 1.7 years. So it was very, very easy from a bottom line standpoint to say, wow, this is pretty high on the list of projects we're considering of something that we want to look at. Now, again, as an industry, you're going to want to be responsive either to the owner of your company or to your shareholders, your stakeholders, so there has to be a bottom line benefit. That's obviously what's going to drive getting into reusables. But there are often a whole host of side benefits that you may not have known. In this instance, what happened? Cardboard boxes used to be put on a hand truck and they would be rolled into the store. The guy would go into the store and he would take a knife, cut open the box, take the time to take the bottles out, put them on the shelf, take that corrugated box, break it down, take the time to go back to the baler, that sort of thing. It's a fairly involved process. When you started setting up with your reusables, what they found out that there was a tremendous labor reduction in the folks that were actually doing the delivery into the stores. They could wheel in these systems, and in some instances, wheel them right up to an end aisle display, and other than just turning all the labels to make sure that they were all facing outward, they were done. It was very quick and easy. No trips back to the baler, that sort of thing. Label damage was eliminated. Again, something you wouldn't necessarily consider, but with a cardboard box, these guys are trying to work quickly. They're incented to get to more stores throughout a day. They'd take a knife, they'd slice open that cardboard box. Well, invariably, they would slice open that label, which for someone like Coke or Pepsi, whose brand is so important to what they do, a sliced label obviously is going to drive down their sales. With these things, there's no knife. And so again, it was just one more thing that made their package look that much better when it was out on display. The fact that they were moving through the stores more quickly and that the delivery folks were in and out more quickly meant that there was less interruption for the retailer's customers. That when you, as a shopper, were going through, you weren't going around the guy that was setting up these systems because he wasn't there anymore. He was spending 20 minutes in store instead of 2 hours in store, that sort of thing. That's at the retail level, and from a labor savings standpoint. Again, things like more less customer interaction and having to battle the delivery guy, that was not only a benefit to the vendor, but obviously also to the retailer. It was a benefit to them. But back on the plant side, wet boxes was a huge problem. Obviously, in a filling plant, there's a lot of wash equipment and cleaning, and there's things that get wet. Cardboard box goes up in a stack, gets wet, falls over. There's liability, worker safety, et cetera. Plastic containers, obviously, whether they're wet or dry, they have the same structural integrity. So that kind of thing, again, was eliminated. How do you determine whether or not a system like this could work for you? Certainly in this instance, again, this is closed loop. Real easy to see how you can control it. So clearly, on a direct store delivery basis where a bakery or a beverage company or something is actually going into a retailer, driving with their own trucks, with their own delivery folks, pretty easy to see in a closed loop system, this is what's going to make sense. Very rapid cycles. In this case, it was 5 weeks. We've had cycles that are 8, even 12 weeks long that it still makes sense. Maybe the shipping distance is a little bit further. The reverse logistics are a little bit longer, but it can still make sense. Real good degree of asset control. As Andy mentioned, you do need your partners to work with you. If you're a vendor, you need the receiver to be willing to get that returnable asset back to you. In some instances over in Europe, what happened on the retail side is the retailers decided, you know what, we'll own the asset and we'll provide them to our vendors. They'll ship that product in. We'll have them reduce the packaging cost from their cost of goods sold when they're shipping it into us. But now the retailer was very motivated to get that container back to their vendors, and so they did trip those assets much, much more quickly. As I mentioned, there's benefits both to the vendor and the customer, and of course, if it's a closed-loop system, it's real easy to see.